You have to have a couple people that say like, fuck, I don't care if this work looks good, it looks really insane.
Yeah, it's like, you know, looking at the ground and like seeing these stains or seeing whatever and like just wanting to capture that, or like seeing like beautiful tags, like just layers of tags that have built up. And it's like noticing that particular stuff, because everybody, it's all about what people notice. Some people are like really like, you know, walking around with some people, you know, a friend of mine is obsessed with architecture in a way. Like, oh, you know, we'll be looking around and they're like, oh, look at the molding. Like, that's such a beautiful building. Like, blah blah blah. That's so beautiful. And then, you know, I'll look at like a stain or like a piece of, you know, concrete that's like really interesting. Like someone else will notice like everybody's just noticing things. Like we're pattern recognition machines, and it's like we're all just plugged into different stuff.
Oh, I'm Violet. Um, I'm a painter based in New York. Um, and yeah, I make sort of multimedia pieces based on, you know, the stains and like lettering and you know, tagging and color and just everything that I see day to day, just living in a pretty urban environment, and re-ingest that, making pretty abstract works that, yeah, at the end of the day, you know, fold together a lot of, you know, ideas of you know, incident expression and you know, these sort of subconscious ideas and movements and sort of hieroglyphic elements that make appearances in so much of the work, both accidental and intentional, that we see. We kind of, you know, maybe don't notice so much in our day to day, kind of ingesting those movements and really abstracting them and placing them in yeah, my visual work, which is, you know, increasingly more and more tinged with like personal nostalgia and stuff like that as well. So yeah.
And it's like, if so many people are doing this collectively, like, you know, graffiti and kind of like scrawling on, and I also love like the cement look, more recently trying to capture that cement look. because it's like this cement feels to me like when you see it crumbling, it's so satisfying to see it kind of this very strong material, like the strongest material. It's like building all of these like new brutalist buildings or very capitalist structures that are supposed to be very sound, much like capitalism or much like the system that births them economically. And then you see them crumbling at the base and you see them deteriorating, because in essence they are natural material and nature just subsumes and digests itself. So it's noticing that like that slight deterioration and that like projection onto the cement and like the crackling and all these things, it deteriorates these foundational ideas of like, oh, what we think is right, what we think is sound, societally, socioeconomically, or whatever. Like the cement is degrading.
How would I begin my art? Probably yeah, it feels like a succession of like trying to capture very particular things that I saw and was seeing, like these. I remember I started probably with photography, trying to always kind of capture these very small frames that I was seeing, these very small, almost detailed moments, and yeah, it really took to composing these small catches of like fabric or light, or experimenting with that to kind of preserve these small moments, and then built from there up into more and more kind of drawing and digital collaging and different forms of creative media in order to capture and manipulate these small moments and compound them. And then just years back I just would start painting these forms and was just so obsessed with these types of very intense color that I would just really want to adapt into very abstract forms. And I would kind of really experiment with line on canvas and oil on canvas, and then I feel like all throughout high school and then college in different forms I was trying to capture very small moments, and then these small details, or these incidental details, or these abstracted details where a corner of a draped piece of fabric can turn into this very intense abstracted form in and of itself, with its own shading and its own complexity. And then the more I kind of pushed into painting and visual means, I kind of compounded that.
Kind of reckon with these ideas, and it's like, I think that can only come from creating high impact work, higher and higher and higher, but then you get into this whole thing, especially with painting, right? The more refined you make the object, the better it looks, the more refined a commodity it is. And then it becomes co-opted. So there is such a system of integration that is so perfect, in the art world and everything. But I think that's where it comes down to, the fucking tagging and stuff, which really captures that, taking taking these like very striking visual moments and then just like putting them everywhere and anywhere and not caring that they're going to get taken down tomorrow or whatever. It's like facilitating, like, and it's like you can't force people. And see, that's the pitfall with graffiti that we can like learn from in a way, where it's like, well, you can't force people to look when you, and people will only be able to see stuff when they're ready, and appreciate stuff when they're ready.
I mean, probably what inspires. I think my inspirations come from both painting and, you know, the outdoor world and you know, surface and nature, and they kind of work in tandem where, you know, nature is just such a perfectly balanced or effortless or like sublime aspect of something so much greater, and then art is just such a, you know, the painting and it's almost like its own rendition of that over and over again through so many different lenses and perspectives. And I think they lend hand in hand to just more dexterous attitudes of looking and interpreting and appreciating our world just through so many different eyes and lenses. I think, you know, art can teach you how to look at something, or why to look at something, or when to look at something. And then the world just shows you the sublime aspect of itself. You know, we are so, you know, we are in and of ourselves nature and enmeshed in it biologically. So it's just, you know, looking back at ourselves almost in a mirror when we look and notice the sublime aspect of, or the sublime around us in the natural world and in the world that we inhabit. Yeah. And I think it's that dichotomy, it's that conversation, it's the juxtaposition between the two that really, yeah, inspires me to kind of keep looking and to keep keep, you know, materializing and to keep kind of collecting and preserving and articulating these things.
Layers of, yeah, let's get the light on this. Layers of like red and trash and beads and kind of personal ephemera type, like, you know, these letter beads, you know, which have a lot of like nostalgic connotation, and then it's painted over with gray and sand and pumice, these very like, you know, textured earth-like materials, and then gets sanded down so that the gray comes off and you get to see just little peaks of them like popping out with the tone, because, you know, it gets worn down when you're like walking on all this stuff. So this is like peering down onto the ground.
I think it's like, you know, kind of capturing to a degree and preserving these very incidental moments that accumulate throughout our experience, our own personal experiences, and capturing and almost holding them, similar to that of, you know, I like can think of myself as like amber, tree amber, trying to hold a brief object or moment in time, and, you know, harness it and tinge it, you know, with an ambery glow, and allow for it to seep and steep through, so not seep, but steep through like a continual narrative of visual manipulation and abstraction, so that it can not only hold its own form, but also morph into a sort of another form in and of itself, you know, using these ideas of graffiti and expression that is so of its own and of its own style, and completely, you know, illegible, beautifully abstracted forms, just through the potency of its style that connects to the idea of calligraphy and connects to the idea of, you know, language that doesn't necessarily have a literacy of its own or an alphabet of its own. It is gestural rather than, you know, linguistic. It is in and of itself more ephemeral, and, you know, you're capturing the movement of the hand, and, you know, the incidental stain, you know, that marks our existence, and also marks the abstraction of that existence. You know, our consciousness being the ability to abstract these ideas, and consciousness being more continually manipulative, right? And ever changing in its function, you know? So yeah, blurring the line there as well. Yeah.
Decide to get deep and your work becomes personal, then it feels personal. Yeah. And like so much also where I live comes into the work, like all of this like material stuff, like all of the stuff I use to make work comes from like dollar stores around here that I, you know, will spend so much time in, and it just folds itself into the work. You know, like, oh, I really love this like glittery thing, like tiny, I don't even know, beads or something. And they find their way to work to just like have them around. And this sense of like using, I mean, people have been doing this for years, like using very personal or like everyday material as like a sense of reinventing that, or like creating that, like breaking down the idea of like, oh, like craft, like that's like a craft thing, rather than like fine art being like certain materials, you know.
You know what? Also working in art. Dude, I went to this like huge art fair a couple days ago.
Yeah.
There's like a couple in New York, like, you know, Frieze Art Fair. It's this huge, like, galleries from all over the world are there. Like, all of the best art in the world is like in this one warehouse for a week. And you just get so overwhelmed. I mean, like, if the work's great or whatever is kind of besides the point, because it's like it's some of the worst paintings from like your favorite artist, because it's like all the stuff that didn't sell already, all the rejects from like their actual shows and exhibitions. Yeah, it's just like they'll like, oh, let's try selling it again here. Let's do one more go. And
maybe it'll go this time.
Yeah, and it's just like so overwhelming, and it's so much work that doesn't connect at all to each other. And some of it's bad, some of it's good, but either way you're just absorbing it so quickly because of the speed. Because of the speed, you're just running through like 5 floors. You're expected to do that in a few minutes, and people will buy work that way. Yeah. And it's like, how do you make a decision there? It's impact, and it's just like, I wouldn't want somebody to understand the work through that way, like that. Just, I mean, sometimes sure, like you can really like, whoa, like that piece is like really interesting, but also, yeah, like that's not like a way to process any sort of information, like really absorbing it that way. And that's how we kind of think about, that's kind of how we look at all work. If you think about it, like online, that's kind of how it's shown to us, like that speed. It's very fast now.
How do I feel about contemporary art today? It's tough. I mean, working in a gallery, you're seeing a lot. I think, you're seeing a lot of trends. I think it is a bit of a shortened cycle, much like a lot of visual art these days, fashion, all these things, attention span and cycles are kind of shrinking. So, movements are now kind of relegated to trend cycles visually, mirroring that of fashion or music or anything like that. But yeah, there's a lot of money and attention being put on it right now, which I think kind of can cut down that maturing phase of work where, the work is pushed through its adolescence or its awkwardness into a more dense piece because the turnover rate is so high. And I think there is a lot of pressure for the market to be economically viable rather than able to really appeal, like not appeal, but interact with people in general, just everybody, you know what I mean? There's a rift there. And I think, the internet has also made visual art and language more permeated and globalized, but also a bit thinner and a bit less distinct. There's less saturation of community where there would be just, like a group that really permeates a particular rhetoric or visual style. Same thing with graffiti, it being less regional and community based now. It's a bit more spread out and style is being a bit more generalized. But I think visual culture needs to absorb more of what's, around us and digest more internally before like putting it onto a canvas or onto a material or whatever it may be. I think there's a lot of visual stimuli coming in, but we have so much that we don't have enough time to kind of sit and digest and parse through what we like, what we don't like, what we kind of sit with and ruminate on, and then create our own work from, or, you know, based around or based on. There's less time to kind of sit and meditate with each piece of visual stimuli that we get, because now it's not only ads that we're being bombarded with, but it's also so much other visual work and stimuli. So I think, you know, the work shows that as well. There is just a lot of work reflecting the identity and the sense of self, rather than the that sort of theory, or you know, idea of ambiguity, or, you know, questioning these themes. There's less time for that, less time for discussion. There's just more to discuss, but less time for discussion. And it can be even hard to kind of sit and make work when you're getting too much media, when you're, you know, too overstimulated. It kind of can push you to almost want to clear that and start from scratch. And I think we're building up from that and kind of trying to regroup, you know, because there's just so much, there's almost too much building material, but not enough adhesive material. Like, if you think of bricks and clay, there's too many bricks, but not enough clay, so the bricks are kind of falling without a sort of support structure of visual language, or anything to kind of uphold the next move, because the structure seems to kind of fall beneath it. And yeah. We are our biggest hindrance, our biggest judge, our biggest we being our minds, our mind, and being caught up in our, we are our biggest adversary, because, you know, whatever other people may say is pretty inconsequential, you know, because it doesn't necessarily have to affect if we do or do not make something or do something. But our trepidations, our insecurities are the biggest hindrance to our actually making anything. Because you can make, you can paint, you can this artist Claude Villet used to paint on the tarps of his military tent. You know, we are scrawling on, you know, sometimes it feels like we're scrawling on our own prison walls, you know, of confinement in society, or, you know, with the graffiti that permeate our walls, and really it's all art is graffiti in a way, and cave painting, it's all kind of overlapped and affecting and interrelating to each other. So you know, the biggest struggle is just, you know, getting out of your own head and allowing for it to kind of get excited and get enmeshed and entangled into a manifestation of reality that you have to believe you can create, or else you won't create it. You know what I mean? if you get in your own head, you're, your own enemy. So, I mean, that was like the biggest thing getting in the way of me making art. Because, of course, I've been looking at art my whole life, and we all see beautiful things every day, but we are always telling ourselves kind of this learned insecurity, in some cases, of, oh, I can't manifest this. This is imperfect. I'm making an imperfect or juvenile attempt to conjure something. But really, it's like, once you start something, the momentum will carry you to a place where you can feel delighted at looking at something. I mean, the point that I just love to reach in my own work is being actually able to look at something that I've made and actually enjoy it. Sometimes I'll actually enjoy looking at my paintings, and that feels like a win, because I'm actually enjoying something that, it's like, oh, if other people enjoy it, that's kind of inconsequential, or it's kind of, it's not an end. The end is like, or like a finished product. The finished product is just like being able to actually sit with something you've made, and it kind of evoking in yourself that, that passion as to why you made it in the first place. And passion is in the visual. It's like, that's the thing that we have, because we all have eyes and imaginations, either eyes and or imaginations. And this is all just like feeding that and referring to that within each other and ourselves. I think it's like a mixture between, like relaxing the hand, relaxing the mind, really practicing lines and tags that, I see all the time, and kind of drawing and doing these like small things that kind of will help me practice a larger move, like drawing a piece before I paint it, or practicing a tag before I put it in a work, or practicing a composition, and just kind of constantly be making the larger moves, like a brushstroke or a big finishing piece, don't necessarily feel quite as scary. It's not like you're ruining a piece. Also, like having paintings or drawings that I can like constantly be ruining, be practicing on, be experimenting on, as sort of foils to whatever other larger piece that I kind of have thought out already. You just develop a process, and bit by bit it gets smoother once you know how to work with yourself, for yourself, or towards a particular goal in a material form. You can kind of envision it. I don't envision all my paintings before I finish them. I don't know what they all look like before they're done. Sometimes, but not always. So you kind of have to just like put your body weight onto it and lean into it, because when you're always perfectly centered and perfectly balanced in what's comfortable, and you don't lean into something and lean with your body weight into something, you're just going to create sort of comfortable work, or something you've seen before, and when really you can paint what you want to see, not something that you've seen already. Yeah, I mean, there's only, I guess, a certain amount of control that we have in expressing whatever it may be in the art to the audience. And I don't know, part of me doesn't think about it that much. The other part of me is like, well, you know, as it is a means of communication, it will just kind of manifest and grow its own legs and do whatever it's going to do. I mean, when you make something and it exists outside of yourself, it's always going to be interpreted in its own way, and it kind of just, I think, becomes an entity in and of itself. Every time you put a part of yourself into a piece, like, it is a little chunk of your soul that's just existing on in its own way. And if it's, you know, it's going to do what it's going to do, and that means affecting people. And what that effect is kind of its own thing. It's its own, I mean, really just affecting anything, I think, is important. And I think, you know, the work doesn't need to be understood perfectly in order for it to strike people, or be striking, or be memorable, or evocative, visceral. You know, I used to really be fascinated with, you know, these shapes and forms and colors, these browns, these very like kind of abject or kind of gross or kind of poopy colors, like poopy and red, and just in their visual interest, like just being very striking and balanced, and, you know, kind of searing into the eye, you know. And I think, you know, I have such a passion for, you know, certain visual tropes, certain compositions, certain colors, and I feel like if I could harness any bit of that, you know, passion into a piece, and it were to kind of have any sort of effect on, you know, a viewer of intrigue rather than just pure idolatry, it would be interesting. You know, there's satiating work that, you know, looks beautiful, looks you know, delicious, or very, you know, pretty, or whatever it may be, but taking it a step farther than that and making it its own sort of you could kind of think of it like raising a child. In the early years, the child is very beautiful and you know, very young, and then it grows into this pubescent phase where it's awkward and gawky, and you have to kind of live with this very awkward and gawky space, and then push through that into maturity, into a place where it's not only striking and maybe you know, visually satisfying, but also interesting and intriguing. That's when that's like a more mature piece. So for it to really exist as a more mature work, I think pushing it through those multiple stages of growing and not cutting it off at the, you know, youthful stage where it might be beautiful but it's not finished due to it not being, you know, delivering an interesting or, you know, dynamic dimension is important, and you know, it might not be, you know, quite as youthful, but it is like interesting, you know, or quite as you know, simple or clean, but it would be more interesting. to really sit with and mature and kind of and grow alongside of, you know, because so much artwork kind of grows along with you, and as you notice more things and as you look at things differently and mature. This is the outro. All right. I mean, you learn to be uncomfortable with what you're doing and what you're making, and like, you know, make more weird stuff, and you know, and make all that you want, all that you can. Now is now, and when you you know, when you see something beautiful, no matter what it is, you know, stop and take a look at it, because you know, it might not be there forever, and that's beauty at the end of the day.